Good morning to those watching in the United States, and good evening to those joining us in Korea. I'm Troy Stangerone, Senior Director and Fellow here at KAI. In 2020, then President Moon Jae-in announced that Korea would commit to becoming carbon neutral by 2050. Achieving carbon neutrality is challenges for any country, but Korea faces challenges beyond those of many of the world's other industrialized nations. We are delighted to have with us today Dr. Yoon Suk Yeol, who previously co-chaired Korea's Presidential Committee on Green Growth during the Lee Myung-bak administration, to discuss the challenges Korea faces in achieving carbon neutrality and the structures it has put in place to achieve this goal. Dr. Young is currently the honorary chairman of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network Korea, which he founded in 2013. He also served previously as chairman of the International Advisory Committee for Green Growth Knowledge Platform and the co-chair of the advisory committee for the Sweden-led Global Green Growth Forum. We are also joined today by Randall Jones, who is currently a non-resident fellow here at a distinguished fellow, at KAI, as well as previously the Korea-Japan Desk Chair at the OECD and the Senior Counselor for East Asia. Before we begin, I would like to let our audience know that if there are any questions for Dr. Young, please place them in the chat function on YouTube. Dr. Young, it is good to have you with us here today. Perhaps you could begin by giving us some insight into President Moon's declaration for Korea to become carbon neutral, why it was significant, and why it has been controversial.
Right. Thank you for this invitation. I'm very much honored to have this opportunity to address those in Washington about Korea's carbon neutrality strategy. It was in October 2020, 2 years ago, that President Moon Jae-in announced that Korea would pursue carbon neutrality by 2050. And this was a momentous pledge or a commitment, considering the fact that Korea has thus far pursued a highly carbon-intensive development path. Korea's well-known spectacular high economic growth performance over the period from the 60s to the 1990s, which was very much engineered by such industrial sectors as steel, cement, automobile, shipbuilding, and electronics, has depended very much on the intensive use of fossil fuels, such as coal and petroleum, and in fact, Korea was able to join the ranks of high-income developed countries in the new century, much based upon those 4 decades or so of a highly carbon-intensive industrial development path. And the shift to carbon neutrality would mean that Korea was now have to abandon the traditional development path and pursue a carbon neutral industrial development and industrial development path. And this would require quite a this would require re-engineering the economy in every sector in order to decarbonize, re-engineering the power sector, I mean, electricity generation sector, re-engineering the industrial sector, industries, re-engineering the building sector, the mobility, and so on. And this would present many challenges and difficulties for Korea as it pursues continued economic development. And in that, through that process, Korea would have to incur very high cost of transition to carbon neutrality. But the Korean government and the President Moon in particular realized that this re-engineering processes, the change of the paradigm, would bring in new opportunities, new business opportunities through massive investment, new investment in infrastructure, in various new technologies, and that this consequent innovation would create new growth sources, new jobs, and new income. And therefore, his viewpoint was that if Korea would take a proactive approach to this, the decarbonization process, Korea would find new growth opportunities and new economic development engine, and therefore Korea would come out at the end of the process with a new economic paradigm, which would no longer be so taxing on the environment. It would promote economic growth as well as high quality of life once Korea successfully implements carbon neutrality. So it was a very bold strategy and commitment. And although there are certainly various risks, that his belief was that Korea would, given the past track record, Korea would be able to successfully overcome those challenges. So it was a very bold commitment, risky, but yet a choice which he thought was inevitable for Korea.
So, Dr. Young, you laid out in your initial remarks some of the challenges that Korea faces being a carbon-intense economy. But in the paper, you outlined that there are some other disadvantages that Korea faces. Could you elaborate a little bit on these and what they mean for Korea's transition?
The Korea has a we Koreans are conscious of the fact that we are competing with other economies in the international market for goods and services, so we have to take a comparative perspective, and from that perspective, Koreans are aware of the fact that that Korea is a latecomer to this decarbonization effort, and so whereas most other developed industrial countries have launched this decarbonization process mostly in the 1990s, Korea's greenhouse gas emissions actually peaked as late as in 2018 or so. So this means that since then, Korea has been becoming less carbon intensive. In other words, Korea's carbon emissions peaked in 2018 or so, and that is the starting point for Korea toward decarbonization, and that so compared to other industrial countries which started on this path decades ago, Korea is in a sort of a handicapped position in terms of competition, and so that's one handicap. And another one is that Korea is, relatively speaking, still very much dependent on manufacturing, so that Korea's the share of manufacturing in GDP in Korea is considerably higher than other industrial countries as Japan or European countries. So manufacturing being relatively fossil fuel intensive, this again presents this decarbonization presents a bigger challenge for Korea when compared to other industrial countries. And so and also, of course, the third, but probably more important than others, in terms of the energy mix, Korea's dependence on fossil fuel, especially coal, is about 40%. And this is much higher than other industrial countries. such as Japan, whose dependence on coal is 32%, compared to Germany, whose dependence on coal is 30%, or compared to United States, whose dependence on coal is about 24% or so. And in the case of UK, UK's dependence on coal is about only 2% in terms of the energy mix. So here again, Korea is, relatively speaking, overly dependent on fossil fuel, especially coal in particular. And also here is, so this decarbonization presents a bigger challenge for Korea than compared to other competitors. So in those regards, Korea is in Korea has to overcome bigger challenges or obstacles in terms of realizing carbon decarbonization compared to other countries. So here are a number of technical factors, unfavorable factors for Korea in pursuing decarbonization. But since the world is moving toward decarbonization altogether, and the world has to do that, given the worsening climate crises, then this is the only option, the path that Korea should take. And therefore, it would be, Korea would be has to take this path of decarbonization, and so here are, but Korea has the demonstrated ability to cope with and overcome various challenges in the past. So given this track record, we Koreans believe that we not only have to take this path, but we believe that with strong enough effort and with the capacity for innovation that we think we do possess, that we can successfully overcome this challenge.
So I'd like to move to how Korea will potentially overcome this challenge. And last year, the National Assembly passed the Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth, which established a legal framework to underpin Korea's efforts to achieve carbon neutrality. What does this approach do to move towards decarbonization? How does it link to other policy areas? And perhaps related to that, you could perhaps tell us how it will address emissions target reductions.
How does the Framework Act propose to achieve the carbon neutrality? Is that your question?
In essence, how does it underpin Korea's efforts, both in terms of other policy areas that it touches on beyond specifically emissions reductions, perhaps, and then how are the emissions reduction targets set under the legislation?
This Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth establishes institutions for consultation and brainstorming at a number of levels. At the highest national level, there is this Presidential Commission on carbon neutrality and green growth, which consists of a number of ministers plus private sector experts. And it is co-chaired by a private sector person and the prime minister. And it is assisted by the Ministry of Environment. And then there is the provincial level commissions on green growth, carbon neutrality and green growth. And there at that level, again, there is the mobilization of experts, locally based experts, as well as stakeholders, and among whom there has to take place the brainstorming process. And then at very local level, at the level of grassroots level, there again is a similar structure. So there are at least 3 layers of such brainstorming and public consultation institutions, and then at each level, these institutions are required by the Framework Act to establish plans for decarbonization, including setting sectoral targets, and these targets and plans set at each level are then aggregated to the national level by the Presidential Commission. And so we have this elaborate structure of public consultation, which in turn draw on the expert advices provided by experts. And so this process yields the plans for decarbonization, and these plans are set once every 5 years. And they are revised over time in the light of the emerging new circumstances, domestically and internationally. So we have that structure of interlocking structure of planning and public consultation. So that's the basic framework established by this Framework Act. And by the way, we had a change of government last May. We had this presidential election, and we have a new president who succeeded Mr. Moon Jae-in from the opposite party. And the President Moon Jae-in had his own presidential commission, but with the inauguration of new president, which is Mr. Yoon Suk Yeol from the Conservative Party, there is now a process of appointing a new commission. And recently they appointed a new private sector chairman. And maybe before the end of this month, the President Yoon will have filled all the membership of that presidential commission on carbon neutrality and green growth. And this commission's priority task is to establish the so-called basic plan for carbon neutrality and green growth for the subsequent 20 years until by March next year. So effort is underway to launch this commission, and that commission will then launch the process of formulating the first basic plan for carbon neutrality and green growth. And of course, there will be parallel processes at the lower level of governance in support of that process of preparing the first basic plan for carbon neutrality.
Thank you very much. It's a very impressive ground roots approach to carbon neutrality, but it raises the question, how will we guarantee that each of the individual local governments, that all their targets add up to meet the national goal of a 40% reduction by 2030? Will the national government force local governments to revise their plans to be in line with the national target? How will this operate in practice?
The specifics have not been designed or released yet. And I actually, despite what I said, I doubt that at the local level, there will be established sectoral targets to meet and to implement. But your question still arises and is an important one at the national level of the question of compatibility between the national aggregate target and the sectoral targets. And in principle, and I think this is your point, that provided that we have appropriate carbon pricing mechanism, we do not, and we should not we should not approach carbon reduction by sectoral targets. And I agree with you, except that in Korea, the carbon pricing is very much imperfect. We, for example, have this emission trading system, which is Korea's main means of carbon pricing. But this emission trading system, which is still in its infancy, has been, how would I say, suffering from too much government regulations. So that there is this the government does not much larger portion of the market is does not follow the how would I say, the auctioning mechanism. That is a large portion of the market is consists of free allocation of emission rights, for example, and there's not much liquidity in the market, so that there is a very large fluctuation of the emission rights prices, and so that emission, the carbon pricing is very much imperfect. That probably makes a case for allocation, sectoral allocation of targets, although this sectoral allocation of the target in turn facilitates or makes for introducing regulations in the emission trading system. There is sort of a vicious circle between this. And I don't know how to explain this. In Korea, there is a high level of distrust in the pricing mechanism anyway.
Right. You mentioned in your paper how the Yoon administration wants to focus more on nuclear power, whereas Moon Jae-in wanted to phase out nuclear power. But we have a problem with storing nuclear waste. It's been a long issue in Korea as well as other countries. And you noted that you said cooperation with the United States will play an important strategic role in President Yoon's nuclear energy policy. So I'd be interested in, how do you think the US and Korea can cooperate on trying to address the problems associated with nuclear power and to try to make it a key source of green growth?
There are a number of challenges or problems to solve in order to utilize nuclear energy. And one of those challenges is the problem of disposal of nuclear waste. And the bottleneck there, the problem there is the need to create a storage spaces, storage facilities. And in the past, for more than 10 years, the Korean government has been trying to identify appropriate space for storing nuclear waste, but they could not, the government could not overcome the very strong opposition from the local communities. So thus far, Korea has not been able to secure a waste disposal facilities. Now, still, this intent on making relying on nuclear energy, this government of new president, Mr. Yoon, is now working to create a special law on the provision of nuclear waste storage. Now, that doesn't mean that this approach will work, but this legal framework, legal provisions are being made. And so that's one problem. And what else? Oh yes, nuclear reactor. The Korean government, or Mr. Yoon's government, is very much interested or intent upon developing a small nuclear reactors by the name of small modular reactors, or SMR. In terms of creating for the Korea would like to work with the United States and benefit by the technical cooperations in order to create and manage waste disposal facilities. And also, Korean nuclear energy community would like to work with the American counterpart in developing the SMR. There can be other areas for cooperation. Oh, Korean government believes that Korea is highly competent as an exporter of nuclear reactors. And so Korea government is now working very hard to promote the exports of Korean nuclear reactor technologies. And recently, I think Korea government has signed contracts with the government of Egypt, and there is another one, maybe Polish. Anyway, so Korea is working very aggressively to explore the export market for Korea's nuclear reactors. And there, Korea, I think, would like to work with the United States in exploring the overseas markets for those exports.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, but I'd just like to ask one last question about electricity prices, because in Korea, there's a lot of support in general for green growth, but there's a great sensitivity to electricity prices. So in Korea, electricity prices are relatively low, And as you mentioned, they were frozen from 2012 until this year. So do you see the question of electricity being a kind of a barrier or a problem in trying to successfully implement carbon neutrality?
Koreans are very much used to the idea that, first of all, that electricity prices are tax, a public utility tax. We shouldn't think of it that way, but we are accustomed to culturally to that line of thinking, so that in Korea many people refer to electricity bills as electricity taxes. And people don't like seeing raising taxes. So there is that cultural resistance to high raising electricity prices. And anyway, the people believe that, well, actually the government believes that higher electricity prices can trigger an inflationary expectations. So that when the government is mindful of inflation, and the government fears that increasing electricity prices could trigger inflation. Rightly or wrongly, that's the thinking. And therefore, the president of the country is held politically responsible for higher electricity prices. And by the way, electricity prices are set in principle, in theory, by the Korea KEPCO, Korea Electric Power Cooperation, but it actually, those electricity prices are set by the agreement between the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Industry and Trade. And they are part of the government, and as such, they are allowed to raise electricity prices, so that the KEPCO, the Electric Power Cooperation, annually and always requests approval of higher electricity prices, but most of the time, but as the government does not approve that request. They don't want to be politically responsible for higher electricity prices and causing inflationary spiral. So that especially under the previous government of Moon Jae-in of 5 years, the government has never allowed the KEPCO to raise electricity prices. In the meantime, the cost of power generation has been rising because of higher petroleum, higher coal, and so on. So KEPCO has been running increasing deficits, and its deficit has come to an unprecedentedly high level. So it has become a major problem. And so the government is having a difficult time to make up its mind. And the Yoon Suk Yeol government's sort of a ray of hope is that as the government deploys more and more nuclear power, then that will lessen the lessen the pressure on the electricity prices. But we are stuck there, and so here again we have a problem of unable problem of unable of the not being able to do appropriate carbon pricing here again. Korea's electricity market is very abnormal.
Thank you very much.
Without overcoming this problem, which is very ingrained structural problem of Korean society, we wouldn't be able to realize the carbon neutrality. It is a challenge to be overcome.
So, Dr. Young, just before we go, we do have one question from the audience that we'd like to briefly ask you. As you know, North Korea is fairly deforested. Is there the potential in terms of perhaps engagement with North Korea of offering reforestation and selling offsets as a way to take and engage the North and also reforest North Korea?
Sure. The Korean experts are airing that line of thinking as a proposal, but as you know, there is no communication whatsoever between the two Koreas. So that is an option which is only on the table.
Well, thank you, Dr. Young. This has been a fascinating discussion. For everyone watching, I would recommend his paper to you. It's Challenges for Korea in Reaching Net Zero Emissions by 2050. Dr. Young does perhaps the best job I've seen in English, at least, of laying out the challenges Korea faces, the process that it will need to go through, and what options it might have. There is a link in the chat to the paper as well if you'd like to go ahead and get it now, but I would recommend it to you. But Dr. Young, Randall, thank you both, and I hope you both have a good day.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.